just out of curiosity, how many folks, how many is the Wolfman your favorite? Okay, we got one. Wolfman here. Dracula, like me. Okay, yeah, same here. Any Frankenstein people out there? We got one. Oh, we got two actually. Okay, great. Well, once again, it's my esteemed pleasure to present to you the author of It's Alive. He's going to come up here and talk a little bit about the history of the Wolfman and sort of how it builds up from his last presentation about Dracula. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Julian David Stone.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm going to talk about the Wolfman, but I want to talk about the entire Universal cycle and how we get to this film in the cycle, because the cycle itself has an amazing story. You just saw, many of you were here for Dracula, you saw the first film in the cycle, so I'm going to take you up through it and how we get to the Wolfman. So hopefully, yes, and hopefully we'll get an image up here so I can start. Okay, The Wolfman from 1941. As I said, I want to talk a little bit about the cycle, this amazing cycle of films. This is the entire Universal cycle. Sorry, it just jumped ahead on me again. Anyway, you just saw an image of the cycle. This is a series of films that runs from 1931, starting with Dracula, to 1956 with The Creature Walks Among Us. Well, as I was going to say, it all starts back in 1931 with the release of Dracula and Frankenstein. Both of these films are released in the same year by Universal Studios, and they are huge hits. And in fact, this is the big bang moment for the entire horror genre. Before the release of these two films, none of the other studios in Hollywood wanted anything to do with this type of material. After these films came out and were both hits, well, they all jumped. Oops, sorry, I'm having technological problems. They jumped. Oh, okay. Sorry, my thing is going crazy here. They all jumped on the bandwagon and started making these kind of films. In fact, the term horror comes into existence at this moment. I do not know what's happening here. Excuse me. I gotta try this again. Okay. Hopefully this thing is stabilizing now. So, as I said, they all started making horror films, and in fact, the term horror comes into existence. Previously, these type of films were called mysteries, or chillers, or thrillers, but now that it's clear that they're here to stay, they need their own name and their own genre, and they are called horror films, and they are called this going forward. Well, Universal at the time was being run by a 23-year-old. I spoke about him previously. His name was Carl Laemmle Jr., and after the success of both Dracula and Frankenstein, of course, he wanted to make more films, and he made the next 3 films in the cycle, all classics that I believe were shown over the last 2 days here. These were all big hits, and by the mid-1930s, it seemed like the horror genre was going strong and was doing great. But anybody that has seen these movies knows that every time you think things are going well, there's always trouble around the next corner, and sure enough, censorship. Censorship hit the movies really, really hard, and particularly the horror genre, because one of the really interesting facts about the Universal cycle of films, when they were launched, it was part of what was called the pre-code era of films. This was a period that started in 1928 with the advent of sound and went till 1934. Something about the advent of sound to movies acted as a combination of jet fuel and amphetamine to what was being seen on your screen, and suddenly the movie screens explode with images of violence and drug use and all-around debauchery that people hadn't really seen before, and movies got a little naughty. Well, when this kind of thing happens, there's always pushback, and sure enough, groups like the Catholic Legion of Decency started to threaten to boycott Hollywood. They very aggressively went after movies saying, you need to get your act together or we're gonna shut you down. This is a rather famous photo from the period that shows you all the things that Hollywood eventually agreed to not put in movies anymore when they agreed to the demands of the Catholic Legion of Decency. As you can see, it's drug use and violence and blood, all of the things that people tend to enjoy in movies you suddenly couldn't do anymore, and this hit the horror film really, really hard. In fact, this censorship didn't just affect films going forward, it affected them in the past. I don't know if any of you were here for Frankenstein yesterday, but everybody knows this famous scene, the creation scene that ends with, "In the name of God, now I know how it feels like to be God." Well, those lines were removed from the movie in the mid-1930s, and you could not see Frankenstein with those lines in it again until the 1970s. Yeah. This famous scene from Frankenstein, where he throws the little girl in the lake, well, that had to go, according to these people, and the scene just cuts in the middle of their conversation, which created a rather weird side effect, which is the next time you saw the little girl, she was dead in the arms of her father, and you could now conjure up far worse things that might have occurred than the accidental drowning that happened in the movie. So this is what censorship did to the horror film. Adding to the woes of the horror film, in 1936, early in the year, Carl Laemmle Sr., the owner of Universal, was forced to sell the studio because of some financial issues. A month later, Junior leaves the studio, so now the two biggest proponents of the horror film are gone from Universal. A new regime comes in, and they have a very different idea of the type of movies that they want to make, with all the problems that are going on with censorship and everything, and the direction they wanted to go was different. And her name was Deanna Durbin. She was a young starlet at MGM that Universal got, and they started making lots and lots of movies with her. And they were squeaky clean little musicals, very different than the horror films that they had been famous for. So the Universal cycle went dormant, possibly to never rise up again. But then something rather wonderful happened at a movie theater, kind of just like this. About 10 miles away in the center of Hollywood, a theater owner by the name of Eli Ulam looked around and noticed that you could rent these movies super, super cheap because nobody was interested in them. And he got this idea that he would get Dracula Frankenstein, Son of King Kong, throw it up on his screen and see what happened. Well, what happened was it was a sensation. People went crazy. He had to start running the films around the clock to keep up with the demand because nobody realized there was all this pent-up demand. In fact, he realized they were really there to see Dracula and Frankenstein, got rid of Son of Kong, and just started running them over and over again because nobody had seen these films in 7 years. There's no home video, there's no DVDs, there's no streaming, and everybody wanted to see it. Well, the new regime at Universal saw what was going on and suddenly decided they loved themselves some horror, and they jumped on the bandwagon. And they struck 500 prints of the movie, sent it around the country to the same reaction. It was a sensation everywhere that it played. Everybody wanted to see it, so they quickly put Son of Frankenstein into production, very, very quickly, within a matter of months, and put it out in 1939, and it was a big hit. And after that, the cycle was off and running again, never to look back, where they started making a series of sequels to the original films. Well, now that the cycle was doing well again, this same regime, seeing dollar signs, thought, okay, maybe it was time to introduce a new character. And that's where the Wolfman comes in. And now, Universal had a little bit of a history with this sort of genre. In fact, all the way back in 1931, Robert Florey, who had written the first draft of Frankenstein, had written a werewolf story for Karloff, actually, all the way back in 31, but it went nowhere. In 1935, they had produced Werewolf of London. But oddly, even though this is technically part of the Universal cycle, it's almost not considered. It has a very different look. It doesn't really quite fit in with the other classic horror films. Plus, it was released right around the time that the censorship began, so the film had kind of been forgotten. So when the new regime decided they wanted to bring back the idea of a werewolf or a wolfman, they turned to a screenwriter named Kurt Siodmak. And he was an immigrant from Germany. He had left Germany because of what the Nazis were doing, and he was the one who was brought in to revitalize it. And he created everything that you're going to see on the screen. It seems like all this stuff you'll see are from folklore. He actually created almost all of it from whole cloth, but he also infused it with things that were going on in the world at the time. In fact, he knew a little something about being marked with a star, being perhaps a sense that you might die soon from some of his experiences back in Germany, and he knew a little something about people turning into monsters in front of you. So he imbued it with all of these things that were happening in the world at the time that he wrote the script. Well, he was famously friends with Bela Lugosi, and Bela lobbied him very very hard hoping that he could get the lead role in this movie. But as I'm sure most people know, he's in the film, but he does not have the lead role in it. In fact, the lead in this movie goes to Lon Chaney Jr. This would be his entrance really certainly into the Universal monster cycle of films. And you'll see it's a wonderful performance in this film. And he was the son of Lon Chaney, the legendary star from the silent era. And they had a very complicated relationship. In fact, while Lon Chaney was alive, while his father was alive, he forbade Lon Chaney Jr. from being in the film business. Well, Lon Chaney dies in 1930, and after he passes away, his son decides to go into movies. His name is actually Creighton Chaney, but right away when he begins his career, the studios pressured him to change it to Lon Chaney Jr. to obviously exploit, the success of his father. He's resistant, but he gives in, and over the next 6 or 7 years, his career kind of doesn't go anywhere, even with the name change. He really, really struggles. Finally, in the late 1930s, he gets cast in a production on stage of Mice and Men in Los Angeles, and it's kind of a breakout hit. And from this, he gets cast in the movie of Mice and Men. He gets fantastic reviews in this. Universal signs him to a 7-year deal, and he begins his part in Universal Horror by being the Wolfman, of course. Wolfman shoots between September 8, 1941 to November 25th, 1941. By all accounts, it's a good shoot. The usual tensions on set between him and particularly the leading lady, but all around it does well, although famously he did not get along with Jack Pierce, the famous makeup artist, as you can see in this picture. They had some tension, but they got through the shoot. The film was released 2 days after Pearl Harbor on December 9th, 1941, and is a massive hit. Makes tons of money, and Universal, of course, starts making more films with the Wolfman in it. Interestingly, there's never a sequel standalone film of the Wolfman, though Lon Chaney would go on to play it many more times. He never gets his own sequel. It's always with other monsters. And then just briefly a little bit about Lon Chaney. One of the interesting things about him, even though he comes to the cycle a little later, he is the only actor who really plays all the major monsters. He appears as the Mummy, he appears as Frankenstein's monster, and he even takes a shot at Dracula, basically, in one of them. He's the only one that did it. So, Karloff and Lugosi played other little characters, but none of them played all of them. And he also has the distinction of being the only one who ever played the Wolfman. So he has a very interesting legacy compared to the other actors. So thank you for listening. I hope you will enjoy the Wolfman. I think the Count is going to come up and say a few words. I will be out in the lobby afterwards. If you want to see me, I have my books with me. This is about the making of Frankenstein. And thank you for your time.
I'm not sure I could have said anything better myself. It was truly a really great presentation. One thing I will add though, so like you said, Chaney did Of Mice and Men, the film version in 1939, but it was his role in the next year as Dynamo Dan the Electric Man, a man-made monster that really caught the eye of producer George Wagner, and this was the movie that Wagner said, okay, there's something here. Chaney had what you called an everyman persona. A relatable guy, somebody you could see at a local bar, a local church, Rotary Club meeting, what have you. And this was the kind of character, this was the kind of actor that they needed to play Lawrence Talbot, who actually originally in the script, it was written that he was just a mechanic coming over to Wales to help prepare a telescope. But then later on, they sort of reworked the script to make him the son of the Lord, sort of a distant son of the Lord, sort of returning to reconnect with his father. It is sort of implied that they may or may not be a little estranged from one another after the death of Larry's brother. And of course, chaos ensues one fateful night when the full moon rises and and Larry Talbot is attacked by a werewolf. So let's get right to it. Lon Chaney Jr., Evelyn Akers, Patrick Knowles, Ralph Bellamy, produced and directed by George Wagner, and written by Kurt Siodmak. Here is The Wolfman.